The music pulsed through the crowded Chicago bar, a haze of laughter and clinking glasses swallowing the night. Ezra Coleman, 27, stood frozen by the counter, his heart hammering as his boss, Julian Navarro, 29, swayed dangerously close, whiskey glass in hand, his dark eyes glinting with something unspoken. In that fleeting second, Ezra knew this night would unravel everything he'd spent years carefully hiding. Ezra had always been the cautious type, the one who kept his head down and his secrets locked tight. Growing up in a small Ohio town, he'd learned early that being openly gay wasn't an option. Not if he wanted to avoid the whispers and the fists that followed. Chicago was supposed to be his escape, a sprawling city where he could blend into the chaos and build a life as a junior graphic designer at Navarro Creative, a boutique ad agency. He loved the work, the rush of crafting visuals that told stories. But it was Julian, charismatic, brilliant, and effortlessly charming, who made the job feel like a dream. Julian, with his sharp jawline, warm laugh, and a knack for making everyone feel seen, was the kind of boss who inspired loyalty. And, for Ezra, something far more dangerous. Tonight was the agency's annual client gala, a glitzy affair at a trendy River North bar. Ezra had spent weeks designing the event's branding, from sleek invitations to vibrant digital displays now glowing across the venue. He'd expected to slip in, sip a soda, and leave early, but Julian had other plans. "Stay," he'd said, his hand lingering on Ezra's shoulder, his voice low and teasing. "You deserve to celebrate, too." Hours later, Julian was 3 whiskeys deep, his tie loosened, his usual polished demeanor unraveling into something raw and unguarded. Ezra watched, torn between concern and a flutter he couldn't name, as Julian leaned closer, his breath warm against Ezra's ear. "You're too good at this," Julian slurred, gesturing vaguely at the room, the lights, the energy. "Too good for this place. For me." His words were heavy, not just with liquor but with a weight Ezra couldn't decipher. Before Ezra could respond, Julian stumbled, nearly knocking over a tray of drinks. The crowd didn't notice, lost in their own revelry, but Ezra's instincts kicked in. He caught Julian's arm, steadying him, their eyes locking for a moment too long. "I'm getting you home," Ezra said firmly, ignoring the heat creeping up his neck. The cool September air hit them as they stepped outside, the city humming with distant horns and the faint glow of streetlights. Julian leaned heavily on Ezra, his steps unsteady, his cologne, a mix of cedar and citrus, filling the space between them. They walked in silence, the 10-minute trek to Julian's apartment in Wicker Park feeling like a lifetime. Ezra's mind raced. He'd always kept Julian at arm's length, professionalism his shield against the crush he'd nursed for months. But now, with Julian's arm slung over his shoulder, the lines were blurring. At the apartment, a cozy third-floor walk-up with exposed brick and a view of the skyline, Ezra helped Julian onto the couch. He grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen, trying to focus on anything but the way Julian's shirt clung to his frame. "Drink this," Ezra said, handing him the glass. Julian took it, his fingers brushing Ezra's, and for a moment, the room felt too small, the air too thick. Then Julian looked up, his gaze clearer than it should have been, and said, "You don't have to go." Ezra froze. "You're drunk," he said, more to himself than to Julian, his voice barely above a whisper. But Julian reached out, his hand finding Ezra's wrist, pulling him closer until they were inches apart. "I'm not that drunk," Julian murmured, his voice low, deliberate. "I've wanted to say this for a long time, Ezra. I see you. I've always seen you." The words hit like a thunderclap, shattering every defense Ezra had built. His pulse roared in his ears, torn between the urge to lean in and the fear of what came next. Julian's hand was still on his wrist, warm and steady, and the space between them felt like a dare. Ezra's life had been a series of safe choices, but this was a cliff's edge, and he was already falling. Ezra's breath caught, suspended in the dim light of Julian's living room. The city's pulse thrummed faintly through the open window, but all he could hear was the echo of Julian's words. "I've always seen you." He wanted to believe them, wanted to let himself fall into the moment, but doubt clawed at him. Julian was his boss, his straight boss, or so Ezra had assumed. Years of hiding his own truth had taught him to question anything that felt too good, too real. He pulled back slightly, breaking the contact of Julian's hand. "You don't mean that," Ezra said, his voice unsteady. "You've had too much to drink." He stepped toward the door, his sneakers scuffing against the hardwood, but Julian stood, surprisingly steady, and closed the distance between them. "I'm not drunk enough to lie," Julian said, his dark eyes searching Ezra's. "I know what I'm saying. I've watched you, Ezra, every day, the way you light up when you talk about your designs, the way you stay late to get things perfect. I'm not blind. I've just been too scared to do anything about it." Ezra's chest tightened. Scared? Julian Navarro, the man who pitched to Fortune 500 clients without breaking a sweat, was scared? It didn't add up. Yet there was something raw in Julian's expression, a vulnerability Ezra had never seen in the office. He thought of the late nights they'd spent brainstorming campaigns, the way Julian's laughter made the long hours feel like minutes, the fleeting glances that Ezra had always dismissed as wishful thinking. Could he have been wrong? "I don't know what you want from me," Ezra admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt exposed, like every carefully guarded piece of himself was laid bare. Julian took a step closer, his presence overwhelming, but not threatening, never threatening. "I want you to stay," Julian said simply. "Not just tonight. I want you to stop hiding. I want us to stop hiding." The word "us" hit Ezra like a wave, pulling him under. He wanted to ask 100 questions. When did this start? How? Why? But the weight of the moment silenced him. Instead, he let himself look at Julian, really look, and saw the same fear mirrored back. Not fear of rejection, but of something bigger, the risk of changing everything. Before Ezra could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket, sharp and insistent. He ignored it, but it buzzed again, then again. With a frustrated sigh, he pulled it out, expecting a work email or a drunk text from a coworker. Instead, it was a string of messages from his roommate, Lila, a 25-year-old barista with a knack for bad timing. "Ezra, you okay? Saw you leave with Mr. Hotshot Boss. Dude, don't do anything stupid. Call me, now." Ezra's face flushed, and he shoved the phone back in his pocket. Julian raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Trouble?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes still intense. "Just Lila being Lila," Ezra muttered. But the interruption had broken the spell. Reality crashed back in, the gala, the office, the fact that Julian was his boss. "I should go," he said, though his feet didn't move. Julian's smile faded, but he nodded. "If that's what you want." He stepped back, giving Ezra space, but the air between them still crackled with unspoken promises. Ezra turned toward the door, his hand on the knob, when Julian's voice stopped him. "Ezra," he said softly, "this isn't over." The walk back to his apartment in Logan Square was a blur. The city's lights felt too bright, the sounds too loud, as Ezra replayed the night in his head. Julian's words, his touch, the way he'd looked at Ezra like he was the only person in the room. It was too much. By the time he reached his building, Lila was waiting on the stoop, her purple hair glowing under the streetlight. "Spill," she demanded, arms crossed. "What the hell happened?" Ezra sank onto the steps beside her, the weight of the night settling in his bones. "He said he sees me," he whispered, the words feeling both sacred and terrifying. Lila's eyes widened, but before she could pry, Ezra's phone buzzed again. This time it was a single text from Julian. "Let's talk tomorrow, please." Morning light spilled through Ezra's bedroom window, painting his small apartment in shades of gold. He hadn't slept, his mind tangled in Julian's words and the memory of his touch. The text, "Let's talk tomorrow, please," sat unanswered on his phone, a ticking bomb he wasn't ready to defuse. Lila was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee and humming off-key. "You look like you got hit by a truck," she said, sliding a mug toward him. "So, what's the deal with Mr. Navarro? You gonna talk to him or what?" Ezra stared into the coffee, the steam curling like his thoughts. "I don't know," he admitted. "What if it's a mistake? He's my boss, Lila. If this goes wrong, I lose everything. My job, my career, my sanity." Lila snorted, leaning against the counter. "Or you gain something real. You've been mooning over him for months, easy. Don't pretend you haven't. Maybe he's been doing the same." The thought sent a jolt through Ezra, equal parts hope and dread. He'd spent so long guarding his heart, building walls to keep people out. The idea of letting Julian in, of risking everything for a chance at something more, was terrifying. But the memory of Julian's hand on his wrist, the sincerity in his voice, made it impossible to dismiss. By noon, Ezra was pacing outside a small cafe in Wicker Park, where Julian had asked to meet. The place was a cozy hole in the wall, with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus, the kind of spot where secrets felt safe. When Julian arrived, he looked different, less like the polished ad exec and more like a man carrying a weight. His dark hair was slightly mussed, his navy sweater softening the sharp lines of his frame. "Thanks for coming," Julian said, his voice quieter than usual. They sat at a corner table, the hum of the cafe wrapping around them like a cocoon. "I owe you an apology. Last night, I shouldn't have put you in that position." Ezra's stomach twisted. Was this a retraction? A polite way of saying it was all a drunken mistake? "You don't have to apologize," he said carefully, his hands tight around his coffee mug. "Just tell me what you meant." Julian leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze steady. "I meant every word, Ezra. I've been trying to ignore how I feel about you for months. You're brilliant, you're kind, and you make me want to be better. But I'm your boss, and I know that complicates things. I don't want to mess this up for you." The honesty in Julian's voice cut through Ezra's defenses, leaving him raw. "It's already complicated," he said, his voice barely steady. "I've spent my whole life being careful, Julian. Hiding who I am, what I feel. I don't know how to do this, how to trust this." Julian reached across the table, his hand hovering near Ezra's but not touching. "Then we figure it out together," he said. "No pressure, no rush. Just us." The word "us" again, so simple yet so heavy. Ezra wanted to say yes, to leap across the table and close the distance, but fear held him back. He thought of his family back in Ohio, the way they'd turned cold when he came out at 18, the years of silence that followed. He thought of the job he loved, the life he'd built. Could he risk it all? Before he could answer, Julian's phone rang, shrill and insistent. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "It's the office," he said, standing. "I have to take this. Don't go anywhere. Okay?" Ezra nodded, watching Julian step outside, his silhouette framed against the glass. Alone at the table, Ezra's mind spiraled. What was he doing? Julian was offering something real, but real things broke. Real things hurt. When Julian returned, his face was tight with worry. "There's a problem with the client pitch tomorrow," he said. "They're threatening to pull out. I need to go to the office. Come with me?" Ezra hesitated, then nodded. Work was safe, familiar. Maybe it would give him time to think, to breathe. But as they walked to Navarro Creative's sleek downtown office, their shoulders brushing, Ezra felt the pull of something bigger than fear. A spark of hope he couldn't shake. The office was a flurry of chaos when they arrived, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of the cafe. Designers hunched over laptops, phones rang off the hook, and the air buzzed with urgency. The client, a major eco-friendly fashion brand, was unhappy with the latest campaign mock-ups, and the deadline was looming. Julian slipped into leader mode, his voice calm but commanding as he rallied the team. Ezra watched, marveling at how Julian could be both steady and electric, a lighthouse in a storm. "Ezra, I need you on this," Julian said, pulling him aside. "Your designs are the heart of this campaign. Can you rework the visuals by tonight?" Ezra nodded, his focus sharpening. Work was his anchor, the one place where he felt in control. He dove into the project, sketching new concepts that blended bold colors with sustainable themes, losing himself in the rhythm of creation. Hours passed in a blur, the office emptying as the night deepened. By 10 p.m., it was just Ezra and Julian, hunched over a conference table littered with coffee cups and mock-ups. "You're incredible," Julian said, breaking the silence. He was looking at Ezra's latest design, a vibrant ad featuring diverse models in recycled fabrics. But his eyes were on Ezra. "This is why I can't stop thinking about you. You make everything better." Ezra's cheeks burned, but he didn't look away. "You're not so bad yourself," he said, a small smile breaking through. It was the closest he'd come to admitting how he felt, and Julian's answering grin was like sunlight. They worked side by side, the tension between them softening into something warm, almost domestic. But as they finalized the pitch, Julian's phone buzzed again. This time with a text from his ex, Marcus, a name Ezra had heard in passing but never dared ask about. Julian's face clouded as he read it, and Ezra's stomach sank. "Everything okay?" Ezra asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Marcus, he's been texting me lately, trying to, rekindle something. It's complicated." Ezra's heart stuttered. Complicated how? He hated how small his voice sounded, how much he cared about the answer. Julian met his gaze, unflinching. "We broke up a year ago. He didn't want the same things I did, a real partnership, a future. I'm done with that part of my life, Ezra. I want something new, something real." The words hung between them, heavy with promise. Ezra wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered like a shadow. He thought of Marcus, of the life Julian had before, and wondered if he could ever fit into it. "I don't know if I'm ready for real," Ezra admitted. "Not yet." Julian nodded, his expression soft but determined. "Then I'll wait." The next morning, the pitch was a success. The client loved Ezra's designs, and Julian's presentation sealed the deal. The team celebrated with high fives and promises of drinks later, but Ezra felt a quiet unease. He'd glimpsed something with Julian, something possible, but the fear of losing it was almost worse than never having it at all. That night, Ezra found himself at a quiet park near his apartment, the same one he'd passed with Julian after the gala. He sat on a bench, staring at the carved words in the wood. Love finds a way. He wanted to believe it, but his past told him otherwise. His family's rejection, the years of hiding, the ache of wanting something he couldn't name. It all felt too heavy. His phone buzzed, and he braced himself, expecting another text from Lila. Instead, it was Julian. "Meet me at the park. I'm here." Ezra's heart raced as he spotted Julian by the park's edge, leaning against a street lamp, his silhouette softened by the dusk. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves, and the city's hum felt distant, like a dream. Julian looked up as Ezra approached, his smile tentative but warm, like he was holding his breath. "I didn't think you'd come," Julian said, his voice low, almost reverent. "I didn't think I would either," Ezra admitted, stopping a few feet away. The bench with its carved words, "Love finds a way," sat between them, a quiet witness to whatever this moment would become. Julian stepped closer, his hands in his pockets, his eyes searching Ezra's. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About not being ready. I get it, Ezra. I know what it's like to be afraid of this, of us. But I also know I've never felt this way about anyone. Not Marcus, not anyone." Ezra's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to spill every fear and hope he'd buried, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he thought of the years he'd spent running from himself, the nights he'd lain awake wondering if he'd ever be enough. Julian saw him, truly saw him, and that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I'm scared," Ezra finally said, his voice breaking. "I've lost too much to believe this could work. My family, my home. I can't lose this job, too. I can't lose you." Julian's expression softened, and he closed the distance between them, his hand finding Ezra's. "You won't lose me," he said fiercely. "And if the job's a problem, we'll figure it out. I'll step back, take a different role, anything. You're worth it, Ezra. We're worth it." The sincerity in Julian's voice cracked something open in Ezra, a wall he'd built long ago. He thought of Lila's teasing, the way she'd pushed him to take a chance. He thought of the bench's words, carved by some hopeful stranger, and for the first time he let himself believe they might be true. Ezra leaned forward, tentative at first, then with a quiet courage he didn't know he had. Their lips met, soft and hesitant, then deeper, a promise sealed under the street lamp's glow. The world didn't stop, but it felt like it did, the city fading until it was just them, two hearts finding their way. They pulled back, breathless, their foreheads touching. "What now?" Ezra whispered, a smile tugging at his lips. "Now," Julian said, his voice warm, "we take it one day at a time, together." Weeks later, Ezra stood in the office, presenting a new campaign to the team. Julian sat across the room, his eyes bright with pride. No longer his boss, but his partner. They'd navigated the HR policies, Julian stepping into a consultant role to keep things professional. And though the transition wasn't easy, it was worth it. Ezra felt lighter, freer, like he'd finally stepped into the life he was meant to live. As he walked home that night, passing the park, he paused at the bench. "Love finds a way." He traced the words with his finger, a quiet smile spreading across his face. For the first time, he believed it.